Sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is let someone in. For 15 years, Elijah Stone lived alone in the Colorado mountains, convinced he was better off without anyone depending on him. When schoolteacher Clara Whitmore and her young son needed shelter during a winter storm, he gave them a place to stay, nothing more. 3 weeks passed, and he decided it was time for them to leave before folks in town started talking. He packed her things and walked her to the edge of his land, ready to say goodbye forever. Then Clara told him the truth. She was carrying his child. Now this man who built his whole life on being alone has to make a choice he never saw coming. What happens when the one thing you've been running from is exactly what you need? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. The cabin sat at 8,000 feet, where the air turned thin and the wind carried the smell of pine and coming snow. Elijah Stone had built it with his own hands 15 years ago. Every log notched and fitted, every chink sealed with clay and moss. It wasn't much to look at: a single room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace that drew smoke clean, and 2 small windows that faced east to catch the morning light. But it was his. And more importantly, it was far enough from civilization that he could go months without seeing another soul. That was exactly how he wanted it. He woke before dawn most mornings, the habit of a lifetime that even isolation couldn't break. The routine never changed: split wood for the fire, melt snow for coffee, check the traps along the northern ridge, tend to the horses in the small lean-to he'd built against the cabin's west wall. The work filled his days and tired his body enough that sleep came without dreams, without memories. Elijah was 43 years old, though the mountains had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. His face was weathered, leather, his hands scarred and calloused, his dark hair shot through with grey at the temples. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders from years of splitting wood and hauling water, moving with the deliberate economy of a man who'd learned long ago not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. He'd been a different person once: a husband, a father, a man who believed the world was a place where good things could last. Then the fever came through their settlement in Kansas, and in the span of 2 weeks he buried his wife Margaret and their daughter Anna. The little girl had been 6 years old. She'd had her mother's green eyes and a laugh that sounded like water over stones. After that, there didn't seem to be much point in staying among people. The world kept turning, folks kept living their lives, but Elijah couldn't find his place in it anymore. Everything reminded him of what he'd lost. So he sold the farm, packed what little he wanted to keep, and rode west until he found a place remote enough that the silence didn't feel wrong. That was 15 years ago. He'd spoken to maybe a dozen people in all that time, trappers mostly, and the occasional prospector who'd gotten turned around in the high country. He'd traded furs at the settlement of Silver Creek twice a year, but he never stayed longer than it took to exchange his goods for supplies. The solitude suited him. He'd made his peace with it until the storm came. It started as a thin veil of clouds on the western horizon, but Elijah knew mountain weather well enough to read the signs: the way the air pressure changed, the particular quality of stillness that settled over the forest before a big snow. He'd spent the morning securing his firewood and bringing the horses into the lean-to, making sure they had enough hay to last a week if they got snowed in hard. He was carrying the last armload of wood to the porch when he heard the sound of a horse laboring up the trail. Elijah stopped, listening. Nobody came up this way, especially not with weather like this moving in. For a moment he considered going inside and pretending he hadn't heard. But curiosity got the better of him, and he set down the wood and waited. The horse that came around the bend was a sway-backed mare, breathing hard from the climb. On her back sat a woman bundled in a wool coat that had seen better days, and in front of her, wrapped in a blanket, was a boy of maybe 8 or 9. They both looked half frozen, their faces red from the wind. The woman pulled up short when she saw him, and Elijah could see the calculation in her eyes, whether to ask for help or keep riding. He must have looked like something out of a nightmare, he supposed. A wild man standing in front of a crude cabin, a hunting knife on his belt, and a rifle leaning against the doorframe. "Storm's coming," he said, because it seemed like something needed to be said. "You won't make it down before it hits." The woman's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost painful to watch. "I know," she said, and her voice was hoarse, like she'd been breathing cold air for too long. "We've been riding since yesterday. I thought we'd reach Silver Creek before the weather turned, but—" She stopped, looking down at the boy, who was shivering hard enough that Elijah could see it from where he stood. He should have told them to keep moving, should have pointed them toward the line shack 2 miles south, where they could wait out the storm without involving him. But the boy's lips were turning blue, and the woman looked like she might fall off the horse from exhaustion. "Come on, then," Elijah heard himself say. "Get inside before you both freeze." The woman, Clara, she told him her name was Clara Whitmore, practically fell off the mare. Elijah caught her elbow to steady her, and she murmured a thank you that was almost lost in the wind. The boy, Thomas, slid down on his own, but his legs nearly buckled when he hit the ground. Elijah got them inside, while the first fat snowflakes started to fall. The cabin was warm from the fire he'd built earlier, and he watched as Clara and Thomas stood near the hearth, holding their hands out to the heat like they were praying. "I'll see to your horse," Elijah said, and went back out before Clara could protest. He led the mare to the lean-to and rubbed her down, making sure she had water and a share of the hay alongside his own 2 horses. By the time he got back to the cabin, the snow was falling in earnest, thick flakes that turned the world white and soft. Inside, Clara had taken off her coat and was unwrapping Thomas from his blanket. The boy was slight for his age, with dark hair and solemn brown eyes that tracked Elijah's every movement. He didn't speak, just pressed close to his mother's side. "Thank you," Clara said, and this time her voice was stronger. "I know we're intruding, but—" "You would have died out there," Elijah said bluntly. "Both of you." She nodded, accepting this. Up close, with her coat off, Elijah could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that would have been pretty if it wasn't pinched with cold and worry. She wore a plain traveling dress that had been mended more than once, and she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that spoke of pride and hard circumstances in equal measure. "I'm a schoolteacher," she said, as if this explained everything. "I was traveling to a new position in Silver Creek. The man who was supposed to guide us took our money and left us at the base of the mountain. I thought I could follow the trail markers, but—" She stopped, looking down at Thomas. "I made a mistake." "You did," Elijah agreed. "There was no point in softening it. But you're here now, and the storm will pass in a few days. You can rest and get warm. Then I'll take you down to Silver Creek when it's safe." Relief washed over Clara's face again, and she squeezed Thomas's shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Stone. We won't be any trouble." Elijah doubted that, but he didn't say so. Instead, he moved to the corner where he kept his supplies and pulled out some jerked venison and a sack of cornmeal. "I'll make some food," he said. "You both look like you haven't eaten properly in days." As he worked, preparing a simple stew and johnny cakes on the hearth, he was aware of Clara and Thomas watching him. The cabin felt different with them, in it smaller somehow, but also warmer in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. The boy had stopped shivering and was looking around with open curiosity at Elijah's sparse possessions. The woman had settled onto the bench near the table, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes following Elijah's movements. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. The storm had arrived in earnest, and they were sealed in together, 3 strangers, in a space meant for one. Elijah ladled out the stew and set the bowls on the table. Clara and Thomas ate like they were starving, which they probably were. He ate his own portion in silence, watching the snow pile up against the windows. This was temporary, he told himself. A few days at most, then they'd be gone, and his life would go back to the way it was supposed to be. Quiet, solitary, safe. He had no way of knowing that everything he'd built over 15 years of careful isolation was about to come undone, that this woman and her son would find the cracks in the walls he'd put up around his heart, that in 3 weeks' time he'd be standing at the edge of his land, trying to say goodbye to the only people who'd made him feel human in longer than he could remember, and that Clara Whitmore would look at him with terrified eyes and tell him the one truth that would change everything. But for now, on this first night, Elijah simply finished his meal and showed them where they could sleep. He gave them his bed in the loft and made himself a pallet near the fire. The storm raged outside, and inside, 3 people who'd been strangers that morning settled into an uneasy peace. The snow fell, the fire crackled, and Elijah Stone, who'd spent 15 years making sure he never needed anyone, closed his eyes and tried not to think about how right it felt to have voices in his cabin again. How dangerous that feeling was. How much it scared him. The storm lasted 4 days. On the first day, they barely spoke. Elijah went about his usual routine as much as he could, though having 2 other people in the cabin made everything feel awkward and constrained. Clara tried to make herself useful, tidying things that didn't need tidying, offering to help in ways that only made more work. Thomas sat quietly in the corner, watching everything with those solemn eyes. By the second day, the silence started to feel less hostile and more companionable. Clara discovered Elijah's meager supply of books, a Bible, a collection of Shakespeare's plays, and a farmer's almanac from 1867, and began reading to Thomas in a soft voice that filled the cabin with something Elijah hadn't realized he'd missed. The sound of a woman's voice, the sound of a child listening. He found himself working slower, staying inside more than necessary just to hear it. On the 3rd day, Clara took over the cooking without asking permission. She made the same ingredients Elijah had been eating for years, taste different, better somehow. She had a way of stretching supplies, of adding herbs she'd found in his stores that he'd never thought to use. When he complimented the meal gruffly, she smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. "My mother taught me," she said. "She always said a woman who could make a good meal from nothing would never go hungry. Your mother was a wise woman," Elijah said. Clara's smile faded a little. "She was. She died when I was 16. There was a story there. Elijah could tell, but he didn't press. He understood about stories you didn't want to tell. By the 4th day, something had shifted. They'd found a rhythm, the 3 of them. Elijah would wake early and build up the fire. Clara would make coffee and breakfast. Thomas would help carry wood or fetch water from the melted snow. They moved around each other easily now, like they'd been doing this for months instead of days. That evening, after Thomas had fallen asleep in the loft, Clara and Elijah sat by the fire. The wind had finally died down, and the silence outside was absolute, the kind of quiet that only comes after a big snow, when the whole world feels muffled and new. "The storm's past," Elijah said, staring into the flames. "We can head down tomorrow if the trail's clear enough." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You've been very kind to us, Mr. Stone." "Elijah," he said. "Just Elijah." "Elijah, then." She folded her, hands in her lap, and he noticed how small they were, how worn, teacher's hands, marked by chalk and hard work. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, wary. "Why do you live up here all alone?" It was the question he'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. He could have deflected, could have told her it wasn't her business. But something about the firelight and the late hour and the unexpected ease he felt in her company made him answer honestly. "I had a family once," he said slowly. "A wife, a daughter. They died of fever 15 years back. After that I couldn't—" He stopped, searching for words. "I couldn't find a reason to be around people anymore. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost. So I came up here where the only thing that could hurt me was the weather." Clara was quiet, absorbing this. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "I understand that kind of loss. My husband died 2 years ago. He was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was a complicated man. Our marriage wasn't easy. But his death left Thomas and me with nothing. No home, no family, no money. That's why I'm traveling to Silver Creek. A teaching position is the only way I can provide for my son." "What happened to your husband?" Elijah asked, though some instinct told him he might not want to know the answer. "He was shot," Clara said quietly. "A dispute over a card game, they told me. He always had a temper, and he always thought he was cleverer than he was." She looked down at her hands. "Thomas was only 6 when it happened. He barely remembers his father, which might be a mercy." They sat in silence for a while, two people who'd known loss in different ways. Outside, an owl called, the sound lonely and distant. "Your daughter," Clara said softly. "What was her name?" "Anna." The name came out rougher than he intended. She was 6 years old. She liked to sing. He stopped, surprised by how much it still hurt to talk about her. "I haven't said her name out loud in years." Clara reached over and placed her small hand on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately, and the contact sent something electric through him. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for letting us in, even just for a few days." Elijah looked at her then, really looked at her. In the firelight, her auburn hair gleamed copper, and her eyes, he realized they were green, like Margaret's had been held a warmth that made something in his chest ache. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in a showy way, but in the quiet manner of a woman who'd survived hard things and come through with her kindness intact. "Clara," he said, and his voice came out lower than he meant it to. She looked up at him, and he saw the same awareness in her eyes, the same recognition of something passing between them that neither of them had asked for, but both of them felt. He should have looked away, should have stood up and made an excuse about checking on the horses, should have done anything except what he did next. He leaned in and kissed her. For a heartbeat, she was still, surprised. Then she kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his jaw, her fingers trembling slightly. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid they might break something fragile. Then Clara made a small sound in the back of her throat, and something in Elijah came undone. He pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. She tasted like coffee and hope, and Elijah realized with a shock that ran through his entire body that he'd forgotten what this felt like. To want someone. To be wanted in return. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara's eyes were bright. "Elijah," she whispered. "I shouldn't have," he started, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't," she said. "Don't apologize. Not for this." They stood, and without discussing it, moved together, toward his sleeping pallet near the fire. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, like they were unwrapping something precious. Clara's body was soft, where his was hard, pale, where his was weathered. She had a scar on her shoulder, she murmured, something about a childhood accident when he traced it with his finger, and stretch marks on her belly from carrying Thomas. She was real and alive and here, and for the first time in 15 years, Elijah let himself feel something other than grief. They made love slowly, quietly, mindful of Thomas sleeping in the loft above. Clara gasped against his shoulder, and Elijah buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the narrow pallet, the fire crackling beside them, their hearts gradually slowing. Clara traced patterns on his chest, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Elijah admitted. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the snow-bright world silent beyond the cabin walls. But when Elijah woke in the grey light of dawn, reality came crashing back. He looked at Clara, sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in rest, and felt panic rise in his throat. What had he done? This woman was leaving today. She had a life waiting for her in Silver Creek, a job, a future. And he had nothing to offer her except this remote cabin and a man too broken to be what anyone needed. He couldn't do this again. Couldn't let someone in only to lose them. The thought of caring about Clara, about Thomas, of building something with them, only to watch it get torn away, it was too much. The fear of it was suffocating. Elijah slipped out from under the blankets and dressed quietly. He built up the fire and went outside, standing in the cold morning air, trying to calm the racing of his heart. The storm had passed, just like he'd said. The trail would be clear enough to travel by afternoon if they were careful. They had to leave. Had to go before he got any more attached than he already was. By the time Clara woke, Elijah had already made his decision. He was polite but distant over breakfast, and when she tried to catch his eye, he looked away. He could see the hurt and confusion on her face, but he told himself it was better this way. "Cleaner, we should leave this afternoon," he said, his voice flat. "Get you to Silver Creek before dark." Clara's face went pale. "Elijah, it's for the best," he said, cutting her off. He couldn't bear to hear whatever she might say. "The storm's over. You have a job waiting. Thomas needs to get settled before school starts." "Last night," she began. "Was a mistake," Elijah said, and hated himself for the way she flinched. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. We shouldn't have. You're leaving, and that's how it needs to be." Clara stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of hurt and anger. Then she lifted her chin, gathering her, dignity around her like armor. "Of course," she said quietly. "You're right. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Stone." The formality in her voice, Mr. Stone, not Elijah, felt like a knife between his ribs. Thomas came down from the loft, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and looked between the two adults with the uncanny perception of children who sense when something is wrong. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. They prepared to leave, gathering Clara's few belongings, checking the horses. The easy rhythm they'd found over the past 4 days was gone, replaced by painful awkwardness. But Elijah told himself he was doing the right thing, that protecting his heart was worth the pain in Clara's eyes. He was wrong, but he wouldn't know that for 3 more weeks. He wouldn't know it until the moment she told him about the child growing inside her, the child that had been created on that snowy night when 2 lonely people had reached for each other in the darkness and found for just a little while something that felt like home. They left at dawn, when the light was still grey and uncertain. Clara and Thomas sat on the old mare, wrapped in blankets against the cold. Elijah led them on his own horse, a sturdy gelding that knew the mountain trails by heart. Nobody spoke. There didn't seem to be anything left to say. The journey down was slow and careful. Spring was starting to show itself in the lower elevations, patches of bare ground appearing through the snow, the first brave shoots of green pushing through the frozen earth. In a few weeks, the mountains would be beautiful, alive with wild flowers and running water. But today, everything felt grey and dead. They'd been riding for about 2 hours when Clara swayed in the saddle. Elijah, riding ahead, heard Thomas's worried voice and turned back quickly. "Ma?" the boy was saying. "Ma, are you all right?" Clara's face had gone pale, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was weak. Elijah rode back to them. "You don't look fine." "It's nothing," Clara insisted, "just the motion of the horse. I'll be all right in a moment." But a moment later, she lurched to the side, and Elijah had to reach out quickly to steady her. Her skin was clammy under his hand. "We're stopping," he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. There was a small clearing just ahead, and he led them to it. He helped Clara down from the mare, and she sank onto a fallen log, her head in her hands. Thomas hovered anxiously beside her. "Is Ma sick?" he asked Elijah. I don't know, Elijah said honestly. He knelt in front of Clara. Have you been feeling poorly? Just the past week or so, Clara admitted, queasy in the mornings mostly, and tired. I thought it was just... She stopped, and something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or realization. I thought it was just the altitude. But Elijah saw the moment she understood what it really was. He saw it in the way her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, in the way her eyes went wide. Clara, he said quietly. She looked up at him, and he could see she was trying not to cry. I need a moment, she said. Please. Elijah stood and walked a little distance away, giving her space. He took Thomas with him, distracting the boy by pointing out animal tracks in the snow. But his mind was racing. The morning sickness, the fatigue, the timing 3 weeks since that night by the fire. It wasn't certain, it was too soon to be certain, but the possibility hung in the air between them like smoke. When Clara finally stood, she was steadier, though her face was still pale. We should keep going, she said. They rode in silence for another hour. The trail wound down through stands of pine and aspen, following a creek that was starting to run with snowmelt. Elijah's mind churned with possibilities, with questions he didn't know how to ask. Finally, they reached the boundary of his land, the place where his isolation ended and the wider world began. From here, it was another 2 hours to Silver Creek. Elijah pulled his horse to a stop. This is as far as I usually come, he said. The words felt heavy, final. The trail's clear from here. Just follow it down, and you'll reach town before dark. Clara didn't respond. She sat on the mare, Thomas in front of her, and looked at the trail ahead. Her hands on the reins were shaking. Clara, Elijah said. He couldn't leave things like this. Couldn't send her off without what? Without saying goodbye properly. Without acknowledging what they both knew might be true. Thomas twisted in the saddle to look at his mother. Ma, why are you crying? I'm not crying, Clara said, but her voice broke on the words, and Elijah could see tears on her cheeks. Ma. Thomas sounded frightened now. Clara took a shuddering breath, then another. Then she looked at Elijah, and in her eyes was such naked fear and desperation that it stopped his heart. I can't, she whispered. Can't what? Elijah asked, though he thought he knew. I can't go. Clara's voice was barely audible. Elijah, She stopped, looked down at Thomas, then back at Elijah. I need to tell you something, but not here, not like this. Everything in Elijah went still. Tell me what? Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was resolve there alongside the fear. Thomas, sweetheart, I need you to get down for a moment. Go look at those tracks over there. I think they might be from a fox. But Ma, please, Thomas. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. Just for a minute. The boy slid down from the horse, confused but obedient. He walked a short distance away, though he kept looking back at them. Clara looked at Elijah. Her hands were still shaking. That night, she said, the storm. When we... She stopped, gathering her courage. I'm carrying your child, Elijah. The words hung in the bass. Cold mountain air. Elijah felt like he'd been struck by lightning. His mind went blank, then flooded with too many thoughts at once. A child. His child. Clara, carrying his baby. How do you know? He asked, his voice rough. I've been through this before, Clara said. I know the signs. And I've been trying to deny it, trying to tell myself I was wrong, but I'm not wrong. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you were sending us away because you didn't want. Her voice broke. But I had to tell you. I couldn't leave without you knowing. Elijah stared at her. At this woman who'd stumbled into his life during a storm and turned everything upside down, who'd brought light and warmth and noise into his carefully constructed silence, who'd made him feel things he'd thought were dead and buried. She was carrying his child. The fear that had driven him to push her away was still there, sharp and present. But underneath it, rising like water from a deep spring, was something else. Something that felt like hope or joy or the terrifying possibility of happiness. "Clara," he said. She was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. "You don't have to. I'm not asking you for anything. I'll go to Silver Creek. I'll find work. I'll manage somehow. I just needed you to know. Thomas deserves to have a father's name on his little brother or sister's birth record, even if that father doesn't." "Stop," Elijah said. He dismounted and walked to her, reached up and lifted her down from the mare. She came into his arms like she belonged there, and maybe she did. Maybe she always had. "I'm scared," he admitted, his face pressed into her hair. "I'm terrified. I lost everyone I loved once, and I don't know if I can survive losing anyone again." "I know," Clara whispered, "but I'm more scared of letting you go." Elijah pulled back so he could see her face. "I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life, wondering what might have been, wondering about our child, wondering if I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too much of a coward to try." Hope flickered in Clara's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, turn the horse around." Elijah's voice was steady now, certain. "I'm saying, come home. You and Thomas and—" He put his hand on her stomach, over the place where their child was growing. "And this little one. Come home with me." "Elijah," Clara breathed. "I can't promise it'll be easy. I'm still broken in places that might never heal. But I want to try. I want—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I want a family. Your family. If you'll have me." Clara laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "If I'll have you?" "Elijah Stone. I've been trying to get you to ask me to stay for 3 weeks." Thomas, who'd been watching from his position by the tracks, let out a whoop of joy. He came running back, throwing himself at Elijah's legs. "We're staying? We're really staying?" Elijah looked down at the boy, then at Clara, then back at Thomas. "Yeah," he said, and felt something in his chest unlock. "You're really staying." They turned the horses around, all 3 of them, and started back up the mountain. Toward the cabin, toward home, Elijah reached over and took Clara's hand. She squeezed his fingers tight, and he squeezed back. The first week after they returned to the cabin passed in a kind of golden haze. Elijah stopped pretending, stopped holding himself apart. He let Clara into all the corners of his life, all the spaces he'd kept carefully guarded for so long. They talked late into the night about their pasts, their hopes, the life they might build together. He told her about Anna, about how she'd loved to pick wildflowers, about the songs Margaret used to sing. And it didn't hurt the way he'd thought it would. It was sad, yes, but it was also a kind of healing, sharing those memories with someone who understood loss. Clara told him more about her late husband, about the fear she'd lived with, never knowing when his temper might turn, about the relief she'd felt alongside the grief when he died, and the guilt that came with that relief. "You deserved better than that," Elijah said. "I know that now," Clara replied. "I didn't then. I thought marriage was supposed to be hard, that I just needed to try harder to please him. It took losing him to realize I'd lost myself years before." Elijah took her hand. "You won't lose yourself here. I promise you that." They made practical plans too. The cabin would need to be expanded before the baby came, another room at least, maybe 2. Elijah sketched out designs in the evenings, and Clara offered suggestions, and Thomas watched both of them with such contentment on his face that it made Elijah's heart ache in the best way. But underneath the happiness, there was still fear. Elijah tried to hide it, but Clara saw through him. "You're worried," she said one evening. They were alone. Thomas was asleep in the loft and sitting close together by the fire. "About what?" Elijah asked, though he knew. "About the baby." About something happening to me. Clara's voice was gentle. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at me. Elijah was quiet for a long moment. My wife died in childbirth, he said finally. Did I tell you that? Clara's hand tightened on his. No. You said she died of fever. It started with the birth. Elijah stared into the fire, seeing the past. Our second child. The baby, a son, he didn't make it. And Margaret, she got childbed fever after. Lasted a week before. He stopped, his throat closing. Anna was sick by then too. Different fever. Something that was going around the settlement. I lost all three of them in 10 days. Oh, Elijah. Clara's voice was thick with compassion. So yes, Elijah said. I'm worried. I'm terrified. The thought of losing you like that, he couldn't finish the sentence. Clara shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder. I can't promise nothing will go wrong, she said quietly. I wish I could, but I'm strong, and I've done this before, and you'll be with me. That makes all the difference. How do you do it? Elijah asked. How do you not let the fear win? I let myself feel it, Clara said. I don't pretend it isn't there, but I don't let it make my decisions for me either. Yes, something could go wrong, but something wonderful could also go right. I have to believe in the wonderful, or what's the point? Elijah pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You're braver than me. No, Clara said. I'm just practiced at finding hope in hard places. The next morning, Elijah rode to the nearest trading post, a full day's journey there and back. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed information. He'd been isolated for so long that he didn't know what he didn't know about settling affairs, about making things official. The trading post was run by a grizzled old trapper named Silas, who'd been in these mountains longer than anyone. He looked up when Elijah walked in, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Stone? That really you? Thought you died up there in your hidey hole. Still alive, Elijah said. I need supplies. And information. Information? Silas leaned on his counter. What kind? The kind about getting married proper, Elijah said. What a man needs to do to make it legal. Silas's grin was huge. Well, I'll be damned. You found yourself a woman? I did. She must be something special to get you off that mountain. She is, Elijah said simply. Silas pulled out a tattered map and a piece of paper. Nearest proper preacher is in Silver Creek. But if you want it done right, legal and recorded, you'll need to go to Durango. That's where they keep the county records. He scribbled down some information. Tell the clerk old Silas sent you. He'll sort you out. Elijah took the paper. Then he turned to the supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for making baby clothes, things he never would have bought before. As Silas was tallying up his order, he said casually, You hear about those men came through here about 2 weeks back? Looking for a woman and a boy, said she might be traveling alone. Offered money for information. Everything in Elijah went cold. What men? Rough types. Said the woman's husband owed them money, and they figured she might know where he hid it. Silas shrugged. I told them I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Figured if a woman was traveling alone with a child, she had her reasons for staying hidden. What did these men look like? Elijah asked, keeping his voice level. Silas described 3 men, one tall and lean with a scar, one stocky and mean-looking, one younger with cold eyes. They headed west toward the Utah line. Silas said, Why? This woman someone you know? No, Elijah lied. Just curious. But as he rode back up the mountain, his mind raced. Clara had told him her late husband was a difficult man, but she'd never mentioned anything about money or debts. Had she been running from something? Or had she simply not known about her husband's dealings? Either way, it changed things. If men were looking for her, if there was danger following her, he needed to know the full truth. When he got back to the cabin, Clara was outside hanging laundry. She smiled when she saw him, and the sight of her safe, happy, domestic, made his chest tight. "You were gone so long," she said. "I was starting to worry." "We need to talk," Elijah said. He pulled the worn wanted poster from his saddlebag. Silas had given it to him before he left, said the men had been showing it around. "About your husband. About why you were really running." Clara's face went white. She looked at the poster, at the crude drawing of a man's face, at the name printed beneath, James Whitmore, wanted for robbery. "Elijah," she whispered, "I can explain." They sat at the table while Thomas played outside, building something with sticks near the woodpile. Clara held the wanted poster in shaking hands, staring at the crude drawing of the man she'd been married to. "I didn't know," she said finally. "Not about the robbery, not about any of it, not until after he died." "Tell me everything," Elijah said. His voice was calm, but inside he was calculating distances, dangers, what they might be facing. Clara set the poster down carefully, as if it might bite her. "James was a gambler. That's how I met him. He was passing through my town, charming and full of big plans. My father had just died, and I was young and stupid enough to believe a handsome man with pretty words could save me." She laughed bitterly. "I learned different soon enough." "What happened?" "He was good at cards, but he was better at losing. We moved from town to town, always one step ahead of debts or round. Angry men. When Thomas was born, I thought maybe it would change him, make him want to settle down, but it only made him more desperate, more willing to take risks." Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at Thomas. "2 years ago, James told me he'd finally won big. Said we had enough money to start over somewhere new, somewhere nobody knew us. We packed up in the middle of the night and left Missouri. I hoped maybe this time was different. But it wasn't," Elijah said. "No." Clara's voice was flat. "We made it as far as Kansas when 3 men caught up with us. They dragged James outside our rented room. I heard them shouting about money he owed them, about a robbery. Then there were gunshots." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They left him in the street and came back for me, said James had stolen from their boss, and they wanted it back. I told them I didn't know anything about any stolen money, but they didn't believe me. What did you do?" The only thing I could. I grabbed Thomas and ran while they were searching our room. We had nothing, no money, no belongings, just the clothes on our backs. I managed to get work as a seamstress in a small town, saved enough for train fare west. When I saw the advertisement for a teaching position in Silver Creek, I thought maybe we could finally be safe." Elijah absorbed all this. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Clara turned to face him, tears in her eyes. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd send us away if you knew we came with danger attached. Afraid you'd think I was lying about not knowing about the money. Afraid." Her voice broke. "Afraid you'd look at me the way you're looking at me now." "How am I looking at you?" "Like you're deciding whether to trust me." Elijah stood and went to her. "I'm not deciding whether to trust you. I already trust you. I'm deciding how to keep you safe." The relief on Clara's face was profound. "You believe me?" "That I didn't know." "Yes." Elijah said simply, "You're not a good enough liar to have hidden something like this from me. But Clara, if these men are looking for you—" "I know." Clara wiped at her eyes. "That's why I was running. That's why I was so desperate to get somewhere remote, somewhere they might not find us. When that guide stole our money and left us, I thought maybe it was divine punishment for all of James's sins catching up with me. Then the storm hit, and you found me." Elijah said, "Then the storm hit, and I found you." Clara agreed. "And for the first time in 2 years I felt safe. I know I should have told you sooner. I was going to before we left. But then," she placed her hand over her stomach, "then everything changed, and I was so afraid of losing this." "Losing you," Elijah pulled her close. "You're not going to lose me. But we need to figure out what these men want and how much danger we're actually in." He told her what Silas had said about the men, asking questions about them heading west. It's possible they've given up, or they might circle back. We need to be prepared either way. Prepared? How? Clara asked. Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's something I haven't told you, about my past, before Margaret and Anna, before I was a farmer. Clara waited. I was a soldier in the war, Elijah said. Union side. I was good at it. Too good. They made me a sharpshooter, sent me on missions where regular soldiers couldn't go. I did things. He stopped, the memories dark and cold. I did things I'm not proud of, killed men from distances so far they never saw it coming. After the war ended, I tried to leave all that behind. Became a farmer, married Margaret, had Anna. Thought I could be a different person. Maybe, but the skills are still there. The training. If these men come for you, I can protect you. I just need you to understand if it comes to that. If they threaten my family, I won't hesitate. I can't. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The baby, she said quietly. Our baby. You called us your family. You are my family, Elijah said. You and Thomas and the child you're carrying. I'd do anything to keep you safe. Even kill? Clara asked. Even that? She nodded slowly. I won't pretend to like it, but I understand it. These men, James's partners, they're dangerous. They hurt people. If they found us, she shuddered. I don't want to think about what they might do. Over the next few days, Elijah began preparations. He cleaned and oiled his old army rifle, the one he'd kept wrapped in oilcloth in the back of the storage shed. He checked the sight lines around the cabin, noted places where someone approaching could take cover. He set up an early warning system, strings of tin cans on the trails leading to the homestead that would rattle if anyone disturbed them. Clara watched all this with worried eyes but didn't argue. She kept Thomas close, teaching him inside instead of letting him wander the woods like he'd been doing. Are bad men coming? Thomas asked one evening at dinner. He was perceptive, had picked up on the tension. Clara and Elijah exchanged a look. Maybe, Clara said honestly, but if they do, Elijah will keep us safe. Like a soldier? Thomas asked, looking at Elijah with wide eyes. Like a father, Elijah corrected gently, protecting his family. Thomas considered this. Are you going to be my father now? My real father? The question hung in the air. Elijah looked at the boy, this child, who wasn't his by blood, but who'd stolen into his heart anyway, and felt something settle into place. If you want me to be, he said. I do, Thomas said immediately. Can I call you Pa? Elijah's throat was tight. I'd be honored. Thomas beamed, and Clara reached over to squeeze Elijah's hand under the table. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Elijah and Clara lay together, in the darkness. She rested her head on his chest, and he stroked her hair, both of them thinking about the danger that might be coming. I'm sorry I brought this into your life, Clara said quietly. Don't be, Elijah replied. You didn't bring danger. You brought light. You brought Thomas. You brought hope. Whatever else comes with that, we'll face it together. Promise me something, Clara said. Anything. If something happens to me, don't, Elijah interrupted. No, listen. If something happens to me, promise you'll take care of Thomas. And the baby. Promise they'll have a home here, with you. Clara. Promise me, Elijah. He was silent for a long moment, then said, I promise. But nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it. 3 days later, Elijah was checking his traps on the northern ridge when he found fresh tracks. Boot prints, 3 sets, heading toward his cabin from the east. The tracks were less than a day old. His blood ran cold. He raced back to the cabin, his rifle in his hands, his heart pounding. When he burst through the door, Clara was at the table with Thomas, teaching him his letters. They both looked up, startled. Clara asked, seeing his face. "They're here," Elijah said. "The men who are looking for you, they've found us." Clara went pale. Thomas looked between them, confused and frightened. Elijah crossed to the window and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but he knew they were out there, watching, waiting. "What do we do?" Clara whispered. Elijah's mind was already working, planning, calculating odds and angles like he hadn't done in 20 years. "We prepare," he said, "and when they come, we make sure they regret it." He looked at Clara, at Thomas, at the life they'd been building together, at everything he'd found and everything he stood to lose. "Nobody takes my family from me," he said quietly. Not again. Outside, in the gathering dusk, 3 men moved through the trees, toward the cabin on the mountain. They thought they were hunting a helpless widow and her child. They had no idea they were walking into the territory of a man who'd once been called the deadliest sharpshooter in the Union Army. They had no idea how badly they'd miscalculated, and by the time they figured it out, it would be too late. Elijah moved quickly, his old military training taking over like muscle memory. "Thomas," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I need you to listen very carefully. There's a root cellar under the cabin. The trapdoor is behind the flour barrel. I want you to go down there now and stay quiet until your mother or I come get you. Can you do that for me?" Thomas's face was white, but he nodded. "Yes, Pa." "Good boy." Elijah squeezed the child's shoulder. "Don't be afraid. I'm going to keep you and your mother safe." Clara moved the flour barrel and lifted the trapdoor. The root cellar was small but deep, cool and dark. Elijah had stored supplies down. There, dried meat, water, blankets. Enough for Thomas to survive, even if he didn't finish the thought. Thomas climbed down the ladder, and Clara handed him a lantern. "I love you, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Be brave." "I love you too, Ma," Thomas said. Then he looked at Elijah. "Pa?" "Yeah, son. Don't let them hurt, Ma." "I won't," Elijah promised. "You have my word." They lowered the trapdoor and moved the barrel back into place. Clara turned to Elijah, her face pale but determined. "What do you need me to do?" "Can you shoot?" he asked. "Yes. Not well, but yes." Elijah retrieved his second rifle from the storage chest and checked it over. "This is a Henry repeater. 16 shots before you need to reload. You know how to work a lever action?" Clara nodded. Elijah showed her anyway, making sure she understood. "If anyone gets past me, you aim for center mass. Don't try for a headshot you'll miss. Just point and pull the trigger. The rifle will do the rest." "Elijah, I don't know if I can." "You can," he said firmly. "If it comes down to them or Thomas, you can. Trust yourself." He positioned her at the window on the east side of the cabin, the one with the best view of the approaching trail. "Don't show yourself unless you have to shoot. Stay low, stay calm. If you hear me say clear, it means it's safe. Anything else, you keep that rifle ready." Clara nodded, her knuckles white on the rifle stock. Elijah took up his position at the other window, his old army rifle loaded and ready. The weapon felt familiar in his hands, comfortable in a way that both reassured and disturbed him. He'd hoped never to hold it again, but here he was, preparing to use the skills he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and gold. Long shadows stretched across the clearing. Elijah watched the tree line, patient and still. He knew the men were out there, assessing the cabin, planning their approach. They'd wait for full dark, most likely, come in thinking they had surprise on their side. They didn't know Elijah had already spotted their tracks. Didn't know he was ready. An hour passed, then another. Full dark fell, and the moon rose 3/4 full, bright enough to see by. Elijah's eyes had adjusted to the dimness. He could make out every rock, every tree, every shadow. "I see movement," Clara whispered. "East side, by the big pine." "I see it," Elijah confirmed. "Stay ready." Three figures separated from the shadows, moving toward the cabin. They were trying to be stealthy, but Elijah could track them easily. He'd been hunting these mountains for 15 years. He knew every sound, every pattern of movement. The men stopped about 50 yards out, taking cover behind rocks and trees. Elijah could see them conferring, making plans. One was tall and lean, with something white on his face, the scar Silas had mentioned. One was stocky, built like a bull. The third was younger, moving with nervous energy. "Mrs. Whitmore," the tall one called out suddenly, "we know you're in there. We don't want any trouble. We just want what your husband stole from us." Elijah put a hand on Clara's arm, warning her to stay silent. "We know you got a boy with you," the man continued. "You want him to see his mama hurt? Just come out and tell us where the money is. We'll leave you be." Still, they waited. "I'm losing patience, Mrs. Whitmore." The man's voice had an edge now. "You got to the count of 10 to show yourself, or we're coming in." He started counting. At 8, Elijah made his decision. He stood, showing himself in the window, his rifle pointed at the tall man. "That's far enough." All three men startled, clearly not expecting a man to be there. They raised their weapons, old revolvers, poorly maintained. "Who the hell are you?" the tall man demanded. "Someone you don't want to cross," Elijah said. "The woman, boy are under my protection. You're trespassing. Turn around and leave while you still can." The tall man laughed. "1 against 3? You like those odds, old man?" "I was a Union sharpshooter," Elijah said calmly. "I've taken down targets at 400 yards in worse light than this. At this distance, I could put a bullet through your eye before you could blink. So yes, I like these odds just fine." The men exchanged uncertain looks. The younger one shifted nervously. "We just want the money," the stocky one said. "Her husband stole from our boss. We got a right to collect." "Her husband is dead," Elijah replied. "Whatever he did, whatever he stole, it died with him. The woman doesn't know anything about any money. But even if she did, you're not getting to her. Not through me." "You'd die for some woman you barely know?" the tall man asked, disbelieving. "She's my wife," Elijah said. "It wasn't true yet, but it would be. The boy is my son, and she's carrying my child. So, yes, I'd die for them. But I'd much rather kill for them. Your choice which one it is." The weight of his words settled over the clearing. These weren't idle threats, and the men could hear it in his voice. They were dealing with someone who'd done this before, someone who knew exactly how deadly he could be. "This ain't over," the tall man said finally. "We'll be back. Then you'll die," Elijah said simply. "I've told you plain. Next time you show your faces here, I won't give warnings. I'll just shoot, and I don't miss." The three men backed away slowly, disappearing into the trees. But Elijah didn't lower his rifle. Something felt wrong. The tall man had given up too easily. "Clara," he said quietly, "stay alert. This isn't—" The crash of breaking glass came from the back of the cabin. Elijah spun, but not fast enough. The younger outlaw had circled around while they were focused on the other two, had smashed through the small window in the back. The man tumbled into the cabin, glass crunching under him, a revolver in his hand. He came up firing wildly, and Elijah dove to the side, feeling a bullet hiss past his ear. Clara screamed and fired the Henry. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man flinch. Elijah rolled, came up with his rifle, and fired once. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his revolver with a cry of pain. "Don't move," Elijah commanded, his rifle trained on the man's head. The outlaw clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with pain and fear. He couldn't have been more than 25. "Please," he gasped. "Don't kill me. Give me one reason why I shouldn't," Elijah said coldly. "Elijah," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He's hurt. He's not a threat now." Elijah kept his rifle steady. Through the broken window, he could hear the other two men crashing through the brush, running away. They'd left their young partner behind. "What's your name?" Elijah asked. "Billy," the man said through gritted teeth. "Billy Carson." "Well, Billy, you made a bad choice coming here." Elijah moved closer, keeping his rifle trained on him. "Who sent you? Who's your boss?" "A man named Pike," Billy said. "Runs a gang out of Kansas. Whitmore stole $10,000 from him. Pike wants it back, and he wants Whitmore's woman to pay for it." "She doesn't have the money," Elijah said. "I believe you," Billy said, his face pale from blood loss. "But Pike won't. He'll keep sending men until he gets what he wants." Clara's voice was small. "How many men does he have?" "Dozen, maybe more." Billy's eyes were starting to glaze. "Please, I need a doctor. I don't want to die." Elijah made a decision. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Clara, get the medical supplies. We'll patch him up enough that he won't bleed out. Then at first light, he's going to carry a message back to this Pike." "What message?" Clara asked. Elijah looked at Billy. "You tell your boss that the money's gone. Whitmore gambled it away before he died. That's what started the fight that got him killed. Clara Whitmore doesn't have it, doesn't know where it is, and can't get it. You tell Pike that she's married now to someone who can protect her, someone who fought in the war and has seen more blood than Pike ever will. You tell him if he sends any more men here, they'll end up dead in a hole on this mountain where nobody will ever find them." Billy nodded weakly. "I'll tell him." "And you tell him one more thing," Elijah said quietly. "You tell him I know how to track people. If he doesn't leave my family alone, I'll come find him, and he won't like how that ends." Clara brought the medical supplies, and together they bound Billy's wound. The bullet had gone clean through, painful but not fatal. They gave him water and tied him to a chair for the night, posting watch in case the other two came back. They didn't. As dawn broke grey and cold, Elijah untied Billy and walked him to the tree line. The young man could barely stand, his face drawn with pain. "You remember what I told you?" Elijah asked. "Every word," Billy said. "Then go, and don't ever come back to this mountain." Billy stumbled away through the trees, heading east. Elijah watched until he was out of sight, then returned to the cabin. Clara was waiting, still holding the rifle. When she saw him, she set it down and ran to him. He caught her in his arms, feeling her shake. "Is it over?" she whispered. "No," Elijah said honestly. "Not yet. But we've bought ourselves time." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other, while Thomas emerged from the root cellar, scared but safe. The boy ran to them, and they pulled him into the embrace, the three of them clinging together. "What do we do now?" Clara asked. Elijah looked at his family, this precious, unexpected family he'd never thought to have again. "Now we get ready," he said, "because if Pike sends more men, next time, I won't show mercy." He meant every word. The shot was perfect. Elijah had aimed for the man furthest left, the one who thought he was safely hidden behind a boulder. The bullet took him high in the chest, and he went down without a sound. Before Pike could even react, before the other men could process what had happened, Elijah had worked the lever and fired again. The second shot hit the stocky man from the first attack, the one who'd come back for revenge. He clutched his leg and fell, screaming. Clara fired at the man by the pine tree, and while her shot went wide, it kicked up dirt near his feet. He dove for cover, forgetting about the signal, focused only on not getting shot. 3 left, Elijah said calmly. He tracked the remaining men with his rifle. They were scrambling now, the neat formation broken. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd thought they'd be shooting at a stationary target, not fighting a man who could drop them before they got a shot off. Pike was shouting orders, trying to regroup his men. He'd taken cover behind a fallen log, his revolver drawn. The man who'd fled to the pine tree was firing wildly at the cabin, his shots splintering wood but not coming close to the windows. Elijah ignored him, let the man waste ammunition. He was focused on Pike take out the leader and the others would break. But Pike was smarter than his men. He stayed low, not giving Elijah a clean shot. Instead, he directed his remaining men with hand signals. Two of them, the one by the pine and another who'd circled to the north, began laying down, suppressing fire, forcing Elijah back from the window. "He's trying to flank us," Clara said, seeing the movement. "I know," Elijah replied. He moved to the north window, and sure enough, the fourth man was working his way closer, using the trees for cover. "Keep watching the east side. Don't let that one get close." Clara nodded and fired another shot. This one came closer to its target, and the man, by the pine, stopped advancing. Elijah lined up his shot on the man approaching from the north, waited for him to move between trees. There, a flash of movement. He fired, and the man spun, hit in the shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. Two men down completely, two wounded. Only Pike left standing and able to fight. The gunfire stopped. An eerie silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the moaning of the wounded men. "You're a better shot than I gave you credit for," Pike called out. "But you're running out of ammunition, Mountain Man. I can wait you out." "I've got plenty of ammunition," Elijah called back. "Question is, do you have plenty of men? Because I can keep dropping them all day." A pause. Then Pike laughed. "You know what? I believe you could." Another pause. "How about we talk this through, man to man?" "Nothing to talk about," Elijah said. "Leave now, and I'll let you take your wounded. Stay, and you'll join them." "That woman must be something special," Pike said, "for you to risk your life like this." "She is. And you really don't know where Whitmore hid the money?" "There is no money," Elijah said. "Whitmore lost it gambling. The man who killed him in that card game probably spent it years ago. You're chasing something that doesn't exist." Silence. Elijah could see Pike thinking, weighing his options. He had two men down, two wounded, and he was facing someone who'd already proven he could kill at distance. The smart move would be to retreat, cut his losses. But smart wasn't the same as prideful. "I can't just walk away," Pike said finally. "I got a reputation to maintain. People hear that some mountain hermit ran me off. I'm finished." "Then you're a fool," Elijah said. "Pride's not worth dying for." "Maybe not," Pike agreed. "But neither is $10,000 that doesn't exist." He stood up slowly, hands visible, his revolver holstered. "I'm calling it. This fight's over." Elijah kept his rifle trained on him. "Swear you'll leave and never come back." "You have my word," Pike said. "Far as I'm concerned, Clara Whitmore is dead. I'll spread the word that she and the boy died in a fire, that there's no point looking for them anymore. You three can live your life up here in peace." "Why would you do that?" Clara asked, speaking for the first time. Pike looked toward her voice. "Because I'm a businessman, ma'am, and this particular business venture has cost me more than it's worth. 4 men dead or wounded, and nothing to show for it. Sometimes you cut your losses and move on." Elijah didn't lower his rifle. "Get your men and go. If I ever see you or anyone else from your outfit on this mountain, I'll kill you without warning." "Understood." Pike walked to his wounded men, helping the one with the leg wound to his feet. The others limped or were carried. They gathered their dead. Elijah wouldn't leave bodies on his land, and began the long trek back down the mountain. Elijah and Clara watched until they were out of sight. Only then did Elijah lower his rifle, his hands finally starting to shake. "It's over," Clara whispered. "It's over," Elijah agreed. They opened the root cellar and pulled Thomas out. The boy was crying, and they held him tight, all 3 of them shaking with relief and delayed fear. They'd survived. They'd fought for their family and won, and Pike had been true to his word. They never saw him or his men again. 6 months later, spring had fully claimed the mountains. The snow had melted except in the highest peaks, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows around the cabin, Indian paintbrush and columbine, lupine and wild iris. The world was green and alive, humming with insects and birdsong. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the air smelled of pine and possibility. The cabin had changed, too. Elijah had built the addition he'd planned, 2 new rooms extending from the original structure, one for Thomas, who needed his own space as he grew, one for the baby, with a window facing east to catch the morning light. Clara stood in the doorway of the new nursery, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She was 8 months along now, moving slowly but still insisting on doing her share of the work. Elijah had learned not to argue with her about it. She had her own kind of strength, one that didn't bend to anyone's will but her own. "It's beautiful," she said, looking at the cradle Elijah had built. He'd carved flowers into the headboard columbines, her favorite. "She's going to love it." "You're sure it's a girl?" Elijah asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her, his hands joining hers on her belly. "I'm sure," Clara said. She leaned back against him. "I was sure with Thomas too." Mother's intuition. Elijah felt the baby move under his hands, a strong kick that made Clara wince and laugh at the same time. "She's definitely got your stubbornness," he said. "Our stubbornness," Clara corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. "How did we get so lucky?" "Lucky?" Elijah raised an eyebrow. "We were hunted by outlaws and nearly killed. But we survived," Clara said. "We fought for this for us, and we won. That's not luck. That's love." Elijah kissed her forehead. 6 months of marriage, they'd been wed by a traveling preacher who'd come through in early spring, and he still couldn't quite believe this was his life. That he'd been given a second chance at family, at happiness, at everything he'd thought was lost forever. "Pa!" Thomas's voice called from outside. "Come look at this." They went out to find Thomas at the edge of the garden Clara had planted. The boy was crouched down, examining something with intense concentration. When they got closer, they saw he'd found a nest of baby rabbits. "There's 5 of them," Thomas said, his voice full of wonder. "Can we keep them?" "They're wild animals," Elijah said gently. "They need to stay with their mother. But we can watch them grow, see them hopping around the clearing in a few weeks." Thomas nodded, accepting this. He'd grown over the past months, filled out and gained color in his cheeks. The thin, frightened boy who'd arrived during the storm was gone, replaced by someone confident and happy. He stood and brushed off his hands. "I'm going to check the traps like you showed me. Is that all right?" "It's all right," Elijah said. "But take the rifle and stay within hearing distance." "I will, Pa." Thomas ran off, moving with the easy grace of a child who'd learned to navigate the mountain trails. Clara watched him go, then looked at Elijah. He's so different now, so much happier. "So are you," Elijah observed. "So are you," Clara countered. She took his hand. "When I first met you, you looked like a man who'd forgotten how to smile. Now," she reached up to touch his face, "now I see you smile every day." "Hard not to smile when you're around," Elijah said. It was true. She'd brought light into his life, warmth into his cold cabin, hope into his broken heart. That evening, they sat outside on the new porch Elijah had built. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas was teaching himself to carve, working on a piece of wood with the knife and patience Elijah had taught him. Clara was sewing tiny clothes for the baby, her needle moving in and out of soft fabric. Elijah watched them both and felt a peace he'd never thought to experience again. The ghosts of his past, Margaret and Anna, were still there, still part of him. But they didn't hurt the way they once had. He'd learned he could honor their memory while still building a future, could love new people without betraying old ones. "Elijah," Clara said softly, "I never told you what I wanted to name the baby." He looked at her, curious. "What did you have in mind?" "Sarah," Clara said. "After your daughter, if that's all right with you." Elijah felt his throat tighten. "You do that?" "Anna was loved," Clara said simply. "She deserves to be remembered. And I hope she'd be happy knowing her name inspired her little sisters." Elijah couldn't speak for a moment. He just nodded, then pulled Clara close, holding her as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of a warm spring morning, Sarah Stone came into the world. The birth was hard, all births were hard, but Clara was strong and the baby was healthy. When Elijah held his daughter for the first time, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, he wept. "Welcome to the family, little one," he whispered. Thomas came to meet his sister, his eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small," he said. "You were that small once," Clara said, exhausted but glowing. Thomas reached out carefully to touch Sarah's hand. "I'm going to protect her," he declared, "just like Pa protects us." "I know you will," Elijah said. "You're a good big brother." They sat together, the four of them, in the cabin that had once housed only isolation and grief. Outside, the world continued its turning, seasons changing, flowers blooming, time moving forward. But inside, a family had been born, not through blood alone, but through choice, through courage, through the simple decision to stop running from pain and instead reach for joy. Elijah looked at Clara, at Thomas, at the baby sleeping in his arms. He thought about the storm that had brought them together, about all the decisions that had led to this moment, about how close he'd come to sending them away, to choosing fear over love. Sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is let someone in, but sometimes that's exactly what saves him. Elijah Stone had spent 15 years alone on his mountain, convinced that isolation was safety. He'd been wrong. Safety wasn't in walls or distance or carefully maintained solitude. Safety was in the arms of the woman beside him, in the trust of the boy who called him Pa, in the weight of the daughter sleeping against his chest. Safety was in family, and he would never let them go.